Now, in my last video, I put out this AI-generated Reagan. What would Ronald Reagan say about Russia's aggression today, given what he's said historically in his speeches and comments about the Soviet Union? And it's pretty comparable. So that was from the Savage Sage, and I put this out, and I urge you to go see his video, his whole video, to explain, understand what was going on there. Now, that was predicated on the Oval Office, what happened in the Oval Office. I talked about that extensively, like what went wrong, and going through the surreal scolding that happened in the Oval Office and trying to unpack. Like, I was telling my wife, like, I've never seen a president berate anyone in the Oval Office before, and like there've been some shadier people in the Oval Office at times, and so it was hard to understand what was going on. But this is just the way that he's thinking. Now, then I saw this today. This was Americans say by 14 points that Zelensky was not disrespectful toward Trump in their Oval Office meeting. Now, that was my read. I didn't see how he was disrespectful. JD Vance was saying things like, so we've tried this method with Biden, this military method. Now we're going to try diplomacy. And he simply responded and said, well, but what do you mean by diplomacy? Actually, he said, Putin has broken peace agreement after peace agreement 25 times. What do you mean by diplomacy? And JD Vance rips into him and says, how dare you disrespect, the Oval Office and come in here and try to relitigate and that sort of thing. Okay, so my read was that JD Vance was kind of the aggressor here and that Zelensky was not disrespectful. They also say here that by 22 points that it was Trump that was disrespectful to Zelensky. You don't have the cards, that sort of thing. Okay. Now, what's interesting about this is not that it is interesting that there's a difference here. 14 points, Zelensky was not. 22 points, Trump was disrespectful. But when you get into the poll itself, it's really, really interesting to look at. So what we see here is this first one is that did Zelensky disrespect Trump? And it's broken down by things like gender, race, age, income, voter registration, ideology, and party ID. Basically, down at the second row, it's all kind of the same thing when you get to ideology and ID. There's slight variations, but yeah, it's all kind of the same. But at the top, it's kind of interesting to see what's happening here as well. Okay, so gender. Again, did Zelensky disrespect Trump? 37% of males and 27% of females say yes. So only about a third or a quarter said that Zelensky disrespected Trump. So 75% don't think that he did. Now, then by race, white, black, and Hispanic, and these are primary categories. You have generally in the U.S. government tabulation, white, black, Hispanic, and then you have like a American Indian and Asian Pacific kind of something. Those are like the 5 big categories, but these are the big 3. So white, 38% said Zelensky disrespected Trump, only 38%. Only 7% of blacks, only 29% of Hispanics. So again, it's only a small minority that said that Zelensky disrespected Trump. Then by age, it's interesting. 18 to 29, 22%. 30 to 44. Age 30 to 34, 26%. Age 45 to 64, 36%. So it went up by 10. And then 65 and over by 42%. It's all minority that thinks that Zelensky disrespected Trump. But as they got older, they thought there was more disrespect, which I found interesting. I would have thought it was by younger, but again, older people are more sensitive to disrespect sensibilities and that sort of thing. So maybe that makes sense. I don't see a lot of change here between 50,000 and under in income, or 50 to 100,000 in income, or 100,000 plus, 27%, 37%, and 36% respectively. There's not a lot to see here. But when you get down to voter ideology, if they voted for Harris, only 7% see it. And if they voted for Trump, 72% see Zelensky disrespecting Trump. Now, part of that, I don't think it's because they're watching this on, the actual news conference itself as much as watching the media afterwards. Because I talked about this in this video here. I talked about the whole thing, the scolding, what happened there. And then I was doing a video with Johnny Pierce and Greg Terry talking about what happened, walking our way through it. And I saw this, I unpacked it, and then I watched Fox News and I was like, were they watching the same thing that I was watching? Because that's not how that went down. And so the way that they described it, the way that Republicans described it afterwards, the way that it was described on Fox News afterwards was bizarrely different. So there's a big difference, 7 and 72%. Let's look about ideology, 8 and 66%, 8 for liberals, 66% for conservatives. Party ID, 8% for Democrats, 63% for Republicans. So that was really bizarre. Now, they asked the question in reverse as well. Did Trump disrespect Zelensky? And now we see something really interesting. Did Trump disrespect Zelensky? Male, female? Male 52% said yes. Female said 50% said yes. Okay, so that's interesting. A majority, or even and a majority, said yes, Trump disrespected Zelensky. White, black, and Hispanic, white 49%, almost 50. Black 62%, Hispanic said 52%. So yeah, I mean, you're like right on the edge of even or above both times. Age, 18 to 29, 51% said yes. 30 to 44, only 44%. 45 to 64, 53%, 65 plus 53%. So it's right about split, but slightly over 50%. And then income, 50%, 51%, 55%. I don't think there's a whole lot to see here in income. Again, 50,000 and below, 50% said yes. 50% and 50,000 to $100,000, that's what their income is. 51% yes. And 100,000 and above, 55% said yes. Now, again, what's really, really interesting about this is what happens when you're viewing this through the lens of your partisan political perspective. So if you voted for Harris, did Trump disrespect Zelensky? 89% said yes. If you voted for Trump, only 15% said yes. Okay, so that's 17% said yes. That's really, really interesting that it flip-flops. So how you're seeing the event is not based on the event so much as how you're seeing the event. It's Miles' law. Where you stand depends on where you sit, right? So that's what's happening here. And so if you're infuriated and somebody from the MAGA camp is not, but the 17% that, so vote for Trump. Liberal and moderate and conservative. If you are liberal, if you're on the left side of the political spectrum, 83% said yes. If you're conservative, only 22% said yes, and 62% no. 57% of moderates said yes, so they're on the plus side as well. Now, but what's interesting here is, okay, I get the liberals doing that. The conservatives, that's probably about the figure of the Reagan Republicans or so within the party. It's about a quarter of the party that's still there. It's overwhelmed by the MAGA side. And so, but I'm squarely in that side saying, yeah, that's not right. And again, you see it again with Democrats, Independent and Republican, 82 versus 19%. By party ID. So that's where they are with this. And it's really interesting to see how it breaks out. So did Trump disrespect Zelensky? It appears so. A majority of people are saying that it is, but when you break it out by political ideology or political party affiliation, what you see is that it's not the event, it's how you come to the event that shapes your perspective. All right, tell me what you thought about that. I thought this was really interesting. It would help you think about what's going on in Ukraine. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.